Jehovah against the gods of ancient Egypt, Part 3. The contest between Jehovah and the gods of ancient Egypt climaxes in the book of Exodus, in chapters 11 and 12, with the final plague, the death of the firstborn son, as God shows Egypt, there is no God like Jehovah. We have seen how Jehovah has sent discomfort, destruction, and devastation upon the Egyptians as he ridiculed their immense pantheon of gods. In plagues 1 through 9, he has turned the Nile to blood, overrun them with frogs, sent nasty little biting bugs, then swarms of bigger, badder biting bugs, killed the Egyptians' livestock, covered them in boils, pelted them with hail, devoured their crops by locust, and covered the land in darkness. As we come to the final chapters of our story, Pharaoh will reluctantly allow them to go to the wilderness to worship, but they must leave their flocks and herds behind. Moses politely declines, and Pharaoh becomes so angry that 3 times he threatens Moses with death if he ever sees him again. Moses is steaming too, and tells him, "You prophesy the truth. After today you will never see me again. But before I go, let me tell you about the 10th and final plague." God tells Moses to tell Pharaoh, "About midnight I will go through Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die. From the Pharaoh to the slaves to the cattle, there will be cries of anguish among the Egyptians, but there will be absolute silence among the Israelites. Not even a dog will bark. Then you will know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel." Finally, Moses tells Pharaoh, "Your officials will come and bow down before me, beseeching me, 'Go, you and all who follow you,' and that's when I will leave." With that, Moses turns and leaves Pharaoh's court. Jehovah knew that plagues 1 through 9 would not result in the exodus of his people, because that was the way he'd planned it. Now God indicates to Moses that the time has come for him to prepare to leave. Before meeting Pharaoh that final time, Moses had instructed the Hebrews on God's command to ask their Egyptian neighbors for articles of silver and gold, and God had predisposed the Egyptians to give generously. The Egyptians could see that their king's policy of keeping the Hebrew slaves was doing their country nothing but harm. The Lord now gave Moses and Aaron elaborate instructions in preparation for the final event. Naming the exact day, each household or a group of near neighbors were to share a whole lamb, slaughtering it at twilight. They were to take a hyssop branch with some of the blood and brush it on the doorposts and lintels of the house where they would roast and eat the lamb with bitter herbs and bread without leavening. Then, for generations to come, they were to commemorate this day with a festival, removing all yeast, a symbol of sin, from their houses for 7 days, and eating only bread without leavening. Rather than reclining at the table, they were to eat it in haste, with their cloaks on and tucked into their belts, shoes on their feet and staff in hand, ready to go at any moment. But no one was to go out of the house until commanded. About midnight, the Lord himself passed through Egypt with the destroyer, the angel of death, striking down every firstborn son of both people and animals, and bringing judgment upon all of Egypt's gods. But the blood on the houses of the Israelites was a sign. The Lord would not allow the angel to enter there, but he was to pass over that house, and no destruction would touch them that night. Previously, God had caused all the plagues, but he had used other means to carry them throughout the land, including water, frogs, insects, wind, and ash. Now Jehovah would be the immediate visitor in each Egyptian home, showing that he is a personal God and does not take death lightly. The 10th plague not only had religious significance for Osiris, the god of creation, but more importantly for Pharaoh himself, who was thought of, and certainly thought of himself, as a god. Egypt's Pharaoh had attempted to slay the firstborn sons of the Israelites when Moses was a baby. Now, years later, the Pharaoh's firstborn son was taken by Jehovah. The firstborn son in most cultures was special, but in Egypt he was sacred. There was a loud wailing of grief heard throughout Egypt as parents mourned the death of their firstborn, from Pharaoh and those in the court, to the slaves, to the prisoners, and even the cattle. The text says there was not a house in Egypt without someone dead. At that, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron in the middle of the night and said, "Go, leave my people, you and all the Israelites. Take your flocks and your herds and get out." The Egyptian people urged the Israelites to hurry and leave the country, giving them silver and gold and articles of clothing, saying, "Otherwise we will all die." The Bible tells us about 600,000 men, plus the women and children, took their bread dough without yeast and left Egypt by divisions that day, driving large herds and flocks of livestock with them. In these 3 videos, we've seen the 10 plagues that the Lord visited upon Egypt while belittling their pagan gods. In the beginning, he turned the Nile to blood, ridiculing Hapi, Osiris, and Khnum. Next, he overran them with frogs, jeering at Hakwet, the goddess of fertility. Third, he sent biting gnats, fleas, lice, and mosquitoes as he poked fun at Set, or Seth, the god of the desert. Next came swarms of ichneumon wasps, biting horseflies, or dung beetles, as the Lord derided Uatche and Khepri. The 5th plague killed the Egyptians' livestock, mocking Khnum, Apis, and Nevis, the deities associated with agriculture. After that, Jehovah sent boils on both the Egyptian people and their cattle, as he disparaged Egypt's gods of healing, Sekhmet, Isis, and Nefertum. Hail followed boils, as the Lord heaped scorn upon Nut, Shu, Amun, Tefnut, Mahis, and Set. In the 8th plague, locusts devoured the crops, while Jehovah laughed at Osiris, Set, and Isis. The penultimate plague was darkness, as the Lord scoffed at Ra and Horus, the gods associated with the sun. And finally, with the death of the firstborn, God shows his utter contempt, not only for Osiris, but for Pharaoh himself. And the Israelites would tell their children and their children's children for generations to come. With a mighty hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Surely there is no God like Jehovah.